science enthusiasts. My name is Jason Zakowski. I'm a high school chemistry teacher and a science communicator, but I'm also the dog dad of Bunsen and Beaker, the science dogs on social media. If you love science and you love pets, you've come to the right place. Put on your lab coat, put on your safety glasses, and hold on to your tail. This is the Science Podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Science Podcast. We hope you're happy and healthy out there. Yes, we took a week off, so we've been a week of just getting our life in order. During kind of the second week of June, it's super busy for me as a high school teacher. We're right at the very end before exams start. So I'm putting in long hours and then I got sick. I got this terrible bug, not COVID. So we made the decision just to take a week off the Science Podcast. But guess what? We are back and we're ready to go with some science stuff. In science news, we're going to talk about skin, artificial skin, some kind of skin that researchers put around a robotic finger. In dog science, we're going to talk about gene therapy used to help with night blindness in dogs. Our guest and Ask an Expert is Dr. Sara Mazrouei, who's a planetary scientist. So we're going to head out to space and get wowed with her knowledge. Now, I'm recording this on Father's Day, so this is right in line with the dad joke we always start the Science Podcast with. Hey, dogs. You know, most people can't pull off wearing a spacesuit, but I tell you, I rock it. I gravitate towards space puns. Okay, let's get on with the show. There's no time like science time. This week in science news, let's talk about a robotic finger with artificial skin. Are you fascinated by robots? I'm fascinated by robots all the time. I'm not one of the people that thinks that robots will rise up to destroy the Earth just yet. I know it's fun to watch those dystopian future movies or things like that. But when we got to see the Boston Dynamics Spot robot in real life, I just thought it was so cool. And it's such an engaging science tool to teach kids about robotics. So what is this study about? Well, first off, it was from the journal Matter in early June, and it comes from researchers at the University of Tokyo. In a nutshell, they built a robotic finger and they covered it in living human skin. So let's break down what that means. The finger has a bunch of articulated points, and it's actually quite detailed in the study itself. It's actually a really cool kind of schematic. I'm a sucker for a good schematic. So they built the robotic finger with articulated joints. Now, how did they get quote unquote living skin around it? Well, first off, what is skin? The low-hanging trivia is that skin is the largest organ in your body. And yes, it's made from a whole bunch of different things, fats, minerals. There are 3 layers to your skin. The fatty layer, the very, very low layer, that's the hypodermis. The middle layer is called the dermis. And the top layer is called the epidermis. Within the epidermis, there are 3 main cell types. Melanocytes, that's what gives our skin the pigment, also known as melanin. Keratinocytes, which produce the protein keratin. That's the main component, so it's a protein. And then Langerhans cells. Those are cells that prevent things from getting into your skin. So to start to make the skin, the team took the robotic finger and in a blend of collagen and human skin cells called fibroblasts, they submerged it. Then they had a base or dermis covering the skin. On top of that, they poured a liquid containing keratinocyte cells, which formed the epidermis on the quote-unquote living skin. So those fibroblasts are cells that contribute to connective tissue. So the base layer formed kind of like a fibrous, grippy material that supported all of the other tissue that was put on top of it. Fibroblasts secrete collagen, and that also helps maintain some kind of framework. So the base was the fibroblasts, and the outside layer was the keratinocytes. Now, how long did this take? It took about 2 weeks, and after that time period, there was enough skin to call it about the same thickness as human skin, 2 millimeters. On top of that, remember, it's a robotic finger that has articulated points and bends, kind of like your index finger, your pointy finger. The skin was stretchy enough to withstand the robot finger bending around. Also, this is wild, they made small cuts in it, and the robotic finger and the quote-unquote living skin healed itself. They had to help it out because they used bandages that contained collagen. But those fibroblast cells, remember the cells that made the base of the skin, merged the bandage with the rest of the skin within a week, healing it. Now, if you subscribe to making robots have biological processes is a bad idea, this probably gives you the heebie-jeebies. It's not like the finger has nerve cells in it, though that's a goal of the team in the future. The whole idea is that the robot having skin and nerve cells in the future could potentially feel its way around much better and then use those impulses to make better decisions as a robot. Now, for those of you who are futurists like me and you're like, I would love a robotic finger covered with living skin, don't get your hopes up. Remember, this only existed in the lab, and the little finger had to soak in a bath of nutrients in order for the skin cells to survive. If they took it out of that bath, the skin cells would dry and die immediately. So we don't have to worry about the Terminator taking us all out in the future with, skin covering a metal exoskeleton. But for those of you who are thinking about robots in the future that may look and feel as if humans do, this is a very cool step in that direction. I'll leave it up to you to decide if you love it, hate it, or are fearful of it. That's science news for this week. This week in pet science, let's talk about night blindness in dogs and humans, and maybe a therapy for both. Congenital stationary night blindness, or CNSB, means that you will have trouble distinguishing things in dim light conditions. Doesn't really hinder you during the day, but at night, where there's no artificial light, you'll have very difficult distinguishing stuff, which could really affect you if you're a driver. Now, I had laser eye surgery and I have starring at night, and I know my night vision isn't what it used to be, but I definitely wouldn't be considered as having CSNB. Now, what does this have to do with dogs? Well, this comes from early research and then up-to-date research. In 2015, at Penn State's Veterinary Medicine School, researchers there learned that dogs could develop a form of inherited night blindness very similar to the conditions in people. Also, further from this, I believe a couple years later, the same team identified what the gene was that was responsible for this night blindness. The new research comes from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, and the team has made a very bold advance. They communicate that there is a gene therapy that fixes dogs that are born with this congenital night blindness. This treatment in dogs, of course, is the hope is that it is then passed along to humans, and it targets cells deep within the retina called bipolar cells that contribute to this disorder. So what did they give the dogs? So the dogs were given this gene therapy injection, one shot, that expresses the healthy LRIT3 protein. And they tested the dogs in a maze in low light and a maze in low light after the injection. The effects seem to have fixed their night blindness, and it also seems to have lasted for an incredibly long length of time. One injection lasting a year or longer. From that 2019 study where they identified the gene, they determined that the mutation was LRIT3 gene, and it didn't produce the protein that was required for the vision. That same gene has been implicated also in humans, so there's the connection. In dogs, the mutation affected those bipolar cells in the retina's ability to function, but it didn't, if you didn't have that properly functioning bipolar cell in this condition, it affected your ability to see at night, but not your overall vision. Now, it was very difficult for the team to get to this point. We're talking about a very specific gene that codes for a very specific purpose. If the gene therapy affected other things along the way or didn't fully change that LRIT3 mutation, then the treatment wouldn't work. As this is a photoreceptor cell they're targeting, the functional gene allowed signals to process from cell to the rest of the the eye system. This allowed different cells to send messages, and without this gene therapy, that message was lost. This is very, very good news. A couple caveats. Some dogs had a better recovery or response than other dogs, and the team mentioned that they would like to get to the bottom of why that was. The other thing is the team was wondering how long the gene therapy injection would last. A year is amazing, but would it last the lifetime of the dog? Would they need more than one injection? And finally, of course, the whole purpose of this is to then move this research to the human front. The more we know about animals, the more we know about ourselves. That's Pet Science for this week. Hello, everybody. The Science Podcast will always be free to download and listen to. You'll never have to worry about paying for it. But we have some amazing ways that you can help us out with running the show. The first one is to think about becoming a patron on Patreon. And we call our patrons now the Paw Pack. There's a whole bunch of awesome perks and different tiers of support. We also have a very detailed and excellent merch store. And if you're listening to this in time, we have pre-orders of the Bunsen 2.0 stuffy that was just adorable. You can check it out. There's also the Beaker stuffy on our store and a whole bunch of comfy clothes. The third thing you can do is give us a good rating. Rate the podcast wherever you're listening to this. We'd love to get a great rating from you. Okay, back to the show. It's time for Ask an Expert on the Science Podcast, and I am thrilled to have Dr. Sara Mazrouei with me today. How are you doing today, Sara?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Now, I didn't give you a title, Planetary Scientist, Science Communicator. Is that kind of on the right track?
Yep, you're on the right track. I do all of those things.
Yeah, I was going to say you wear many, many hats, and we'll get to that in a second. Sara, where are you calling into the podcast from?
I'm calling in from Vaughan, Ontario, so just outside of Toronto.
Hey parents, this message is for you. Do you want your kid to listen to an educational podcast made for kids, edited by a kid, hosted by a kid, where we interview kids? Then subscribe to Chase Your Dreams with Brayden Chase. I'm Brayden Chase. In my podcast, we find out what kids' dreams are and help chase them. Whether it's a job, visiting somewhere, a crazy dream, or anything you can think of. I help them figure out what it takes to chase their dreams. It's educational, and I've been told it's pretty funny too. So what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button so your kids can chase their dreams today. Brayden Chase is not responsible for your kids' dreams getting bigger and uncontrollable laughter.
Okay. Now, are you, is Toronto your home? Have you born and raised there? Have you moved around the world? What's going on there?
Yeah, so I moved to Canada about 20 years ago. I was born in Iran and I grew up there. Then we immigrated here to Canada about 20 years ago. Yeah, that's where I've been for the past 20 years or so. I've traveled around a little bit, but this is where I've settled down.
Right. So from the movement from Iran to Canada, it's kind of your home.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I introduced you as Dr. Sara Mazrouei, and you're a planetary scientist. Can you tell us a little bit about your education?
Yeah, so my undergrad studies was in space science. So I always knew that I wanted to do something that has to do with space. Originally, when I was in high school, I walked into my guidance counselor's office and I said, I want to go to astronaut school. So tell me the prereqs that I need to take. What courses do I need to take to go into astronaut school? And that's when I found out there's no such thing as an astronaut school.
Dang, hey?
I know, my bubble was burst. But then I'm like, all right, sign me up for the next closest thing. So yeah, my background in studies are in space science. And then for my PhD, I did a bit of planetary geology, planetary science. So that's where my focus is on.
Now, Sara, what was the bug that made you walk up to your guidance counselor and say, I want to go to astronaut school? Like that's a pretty determined young person. What made you want to go into space so badly?
I wanted to get as far away as possible from the Earth, number one.
Okay. You're sick of the people on it at that point in your life?
I'm just like, there's just too much politics. I just want to get away from it, study something cool. Little did I know there's a lot of politics involved in, space and stuff as well. But all jokes aside, I just really love the fact that, when it comes to space and the universe, I felt like there's always a lot of unknowns. I was always curious. I wanted to discover new things. I would read a lot as a kid, and I wanted, I was just itching to discover something new, to learn a bit more. And I figured, what, when it comes to astronomy, to space, there's, it's not like we know everything about it and I can just learn in school. I can go off and do my own little bit of research and learn a little bit more. And to be an astronaut, to be able to go up in space, to walk on the moon, to experience all these new things. I was always drawn into new things and experiences, and I kind of wanted to be like the first to do things. So that's what drew me to wanting to become an astronaut, which has not happened yet.
With your research into your PhD and your space research after, I'd imagine you've discovered or found some really interesting things. Could you share some of that with us?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of examples. So when I was doing my master's studies, I was studying an asteroid called asteroid Itokawa, which was the target asteroid for the Japanese Hayabusa mission. Yeah, and the whole point was to go to this asteroid, grab some samples, bring it back. And, this asteroid kind of looks like a sea otter, kind of looks like a potato. But we don't know a lot about asteroids other than, they're floating rocks in space. But as the spacecraft was getting closer, we were getting a lot of cool images. We saw that it was sort of like a rubble pile. It had a ton of rocks, or what we call boulders, on the surface. And because it looked like a sea otter, it literally looked like it had a head and it had a body and it was connected by a neck. So what I wanted to study and understand was try to see if this was two different asteroids that had come together at one point or another to form this shape, or if it was just originally one big asteroid and it had gotten hit by something, and that's why it looked the way it did. So what I did was I spent a lot of time mapping all the rocks on the surface of this asteroid, and trying to figure out how many of what size rocks we have on the head versus the body. And what that was going to tell us was if they were both similar in distribution, so if we had a whole bunch of similar size rocks on the head and the body, it would mean that they both originated from the same parent. But if that rock distribution was different, then it would mean that there were two different asteroids that came together. And our conclusion was that the distributions were pretty similar, and it seemed like they were originally one big asteroid. It got hit by something, and eventually, the two pieces evolved a little bit more, formed, and came back together. Again, these are all sort of ideas that we come up with, and as the more information we get, the more conclusions we try to draw based on evidence.
The conclusion that you came to was it got blasted apart and then came back together again. Did I get that right?
Yeah, it didn't fully blow up and get blasted into pieces, but, sort of like two big chunks and then a whole bunch of other little pieces that eventually, due to the gravity of the larger pieces, came together.
And that's why it's got that goofy shape.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's what I spent a couple of years studying. And then for my PhD, I said, okay, we're going to move on to another body in our solar system. But, asteroids, we call them airless bodies because they don't have an atmosphere like we have on Earth. And whatever object that doesn't have an atmosphere or weathering, like the moon, for example, is a really good place for studying the past. Because as you can imagine, here on Earth, a lot of the Earth's history has been erased because we have weathering. We've got all this snow here, for example. We've got erosion, tectonic activities. We have an atmosphere that protects us from a lot of, asteroid impacts, for example. A lot of those get burnt up through the atmosphere. But I love airless bodies. So I moved on to the moon, another airless body much closer to the Earth. And the main reason for that is that, I always say the moon is like a time capsule for events that have happened in our region of the solar system or the moon. So if we want to understand the Earth's history more, the best place to go to is the moon. And we've got this spacecraft called the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter that has been orbiting the moon for more than 10 years now. And it's been collecting a lot of images in different wavelengths, and different wavelengths give us different information. For example, our eyes just look with, the visible range of the spectrum. So if I look at my arm, for example, I see my skin. If I think my arm is broken, I can't really tell just by looking at it. But if I take an X-ray, it can show me my bones and it can show me if anything's broken. So these spacecrafts have all these different instruments that can look at different wavelengths and give us more information. So using this spacecraft's data, what I wanted to do was map out all the large craters on the surface of the moon. Now, craters are these big circular features, sort of these holes in the ground or on the moon that have been created when an asteroid has impacted the surface of the moon. So something hits, it creates this dent on the surface of the moon, and it stays there. Whatever happens on the moon stays on the moon.
It's like Vegas.
Exactly. No one tells you. The history stays there for an entire time. So it's a pretty good spot. And because we're so close to the moon, whatever that has hit the moon must have hit the Earth as well in the past. But again, we don't have that full history. So we went to the moon. We used the new data that we have from this spacecraft to try and date these craters. We tried to look and try to find the age of these craters. And by finding the age of these craters, it tells us when that impact has happened. And I wanted to look at what we call the recent history of the moon. But, when we talk about astronomy and space, recent really means in the past 1 billion years.
Yeah.
So what I tried to do was try and figure out how often the moon had been getting bombarded by stuff, and therefore how often the Earth had been getting bombarded by stuff. I should say that at the early stages of the formation of the moon and the Earth, about 4 billion years ago, the moon and Earth were being bombarded by a lot of stuff. We had this heavy bombardment period, and then things kind of slowed down and it got steady. And, we used to think that in the past couple of billion years, things had been steady, no peaks in the bombardment. But what I discovered was that the Earth and the moon were actually getting bombarded more in the past 300, 400 million years or so. So there was sort of a peak in that bombardment rate. And why we're interested in this, why we want to know, okay, who cares, if we've been getting hit by stuff or not. We know that the dinosaurs went extinct about 65 million years ago.
Yeah, they had a rough go in that time with getting bombarded.
Exactly. And our best estimate is that, there was this giant asteroid impact that then caused a lot of changes on Earth. It sort of made a lot of volcanoes erupt. It changed the atmosphere. A lot of things on Earth died. So again, understanding if there was a heavier bombardment period in the past would help us kind of backtrace and see, okay, well, what happened here on Earth? How did life really evolve? What could have happened here? And so that's what I spent a whole lot of time doing. About 4 or 5 years, I studied the moon. I studied craters on the moon and tried to make a new discovery.
Is there, aside from that, is there any, that's really cool that there's been more bombardment. Is there anything that sticks out that was like, that you would like to tell us from that time?
From the past billion years, this peak that we saw was interesting. It's something that we weren't expecting.
Right.
But a lot of other sort of data that's coming from this spacecraft gives us, sort of live information in the past 10 years. Because the spacecraft is orbiting the moon, it keeps taking images of the same part over over whatever many times it orbits the moon. Mm-hmm. And you can sort of see live impacts. So it would sort of pass over a part of the moon and take an image, and there's nothing there. It's just a smooth patch. And then a year later, it takes a picture of the same area, and we see a crater that didn't exist there before, which is pretty neat. Yeah.
How big are they little teeny tiny craters, or are they like big, kind of scary looking craters?
They're pretty tiny, and tiny in the sense that, they're about maybe like 10 meters in diameter.
Oh, well, that's still pretty big.
It's pretty big for the moon, but if the same size impactor was going to hit the Earth, because we have our atmosphere, a lot of it would break up or burn up in the atmosphere. So it's not a threat. It's just really cool to see.
Yeah. Well, imagine what would happen if there's a 10-meter crater on Earth. Like, that would ruin somebody's day, I'll tell you that.
I know it would.
That's a giant hole in the Earth. Could fit a school bus in there. Oh my goodness. Okay, that's amazing. I love that. When you see those pictures, or you're like, hey, what? Look at the, like, did you get all excited when you saw the different pictures?
Announcing the Library Fairies Kids Stories and Folktales, a free weekly podcast at thelibraryfairy.buzzsprout.com or where you find your podcasts. Join the community of kids, parents, teachers, and librarians who love to listen to dynamic stories and multicultural folktales from around the world that foster fun, diversity, literacy, and self-esteem. The Library Fairies Kids Stories and Folktales. Take a break, turn on the podcast, and let the stories take you and the children away.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of news about this around a lunar eclipse. Like, everybody was looking up. I think one of the impacts actually happened during a lunar eclipse on Earth, and everybody was like, "Wait, what was that? What did we see? What is that? Like, are we looking at this properly? Is this just like, is it my screen? Is my screen dirty? Do I need to clean this?" And no, in fact, it was actually a crater, sort of in real time.
That is cool. That is wild. Wow.
Mm.
That's so cool. So, Doc, you've done a ton of science communication. I usually do background research on my guests, and you've been on TV and you've been in print media and with lots of other organizations. Can you tell us a little bit about your science communication there?
Sure, yeah. It started out as, you might not believe this, but when I started my undergrad at York University, I wanted to volunteer at the observatory there. I actually started as a high school co-op student there. And the observatory was open to public every Wednesday night. And there was this group of, students that would give tours, that would talk about all these cool space things to the public. The telescope was open. People would come in, we would show them stuff. And on a rainy night, we would sort of do a presentation and talk about the solar system. And anytime there was a rainy night, I would try to hide out in the bathroom for as long as I could because I just could not talk in front of people. I just couldn't. I was so scared. I was so nervous. But the people that I worked with, an amazing group of people, they encouraged me. They're like, okay, you know what? Just talk about one planet. And if you miss anything and if you don't know, we'll jump in. So they kind of encouraged me to start talking about stuff. And just being able to have people come to the telescope, put their eye to the eyepiece, look at Saturn and see its rings and just be in awe of it, made it all so worthwhile. It was just so good to see other people get excited by something that I found really fascinating and exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just tried, every day, one day at a time, I just tried to share what I'm passionate about with everybody else. Space is really cool, and I try to share it as much as I can with others, whatever opportunity that I get, whether it's, at an observatory, at a science center, talking to the media about it. I just love talking about it, as you can tell.
Well, you get passionate about what you care about, and it sucks people in.
Yeah, I feel like people, the people that I love listening to are people that are really passionate. If you can see them, you see that sparkle in their eye when they talk about something that they love. And I just find it infectious. If someone's really passionate about something, it makes you want to listen a little bit more. It also helps that my sister is not into space stuff. So whenever I talk about it, she's like, okay, whatever, and like just get to the point. Like, why should I care? So it's been good practice. It's definitely been good practice.
Can you talk to us about some of your articles you've written?
Yeah, a lot of it came out of, it originated from the research work that I was doing, again, with this whole bombardment on the moon and the Earth. And because this sort of increase in the bombardment rate was something new, something unexpected, we were able to publish it in Science magazine. And from there, a lot of the media was interested in hearing about it. And now that we've got the science paper, now tell us in terms that everybody can understand. So a lot of it came from that. And from there, it's been a lot of, if we've got any new space events coming up, like the upcoming James Webb Space Telescope launch. A lot of the articles just come from the upcoming space missions nowadays, or discoveries that I try to write about a little bit. I've moved a little bit from space research to more of space and science communication. So I sort of look more into, what are the new discoveries that other people are doing? What are the new missions? What's exciting about this? And let me take all this cool stuff that's happening and share it with other people through different mediums.
I love it. That's so important. It's so important to have people that can take that kind of abstract stuff that sometimes science gets bogged down and turn it into something the public should care about. And that kind of brings me to my next question. You do a lot of speaking. Are there topics that you like to talk about, or is it dependent on the audience?
Anything space I want to talk about. There are times that, it might not be my specialty in the sense that I would have spent years studying the moon or asteroids, but anything planetary space related, I love talking about. If I could pick, my favorite topics, it would obviously be the moon, followed by asteroids. I feel like, the moon is just so relatable. Everybody just, sees the moon in the sky every night. So it's a little bit easier for everybody to connect with. But I always say we live in a golden era of space exploration. We're going further and further into our solar system, into the universe. The technology we have today has just enabled us to discover things that we didn't think about years ago. And then outside of planetary science, I'm also really passionate in talking about issues relating to having a better representation of folks in science and in STEM, whether it's women, whether it's people of color, people with disabilities. So really folks that historically wouldn't have had the stage to talk about these. It doesn't mean that they're not as knowledgeable or as passionate about a topic. So really focusing on the lack of representation and what we can do to make sure we create environments that are more inclusive and deserving of a variety of folks in our field.
Your profile picture caught my eye. You have this really cool picture with a shirt that says, "This is what a scientist looks like." I'm so glad you're talking to us on the podcast, talking about science and getting us all excited about space and the moon. I have a couple follow-up questions. Maybe you could answer, since you're kind of a moon expert. What would happen to the Earth if we didn't have the moon? Would that be bad?
It would be pretty bad.
Okay.
It would, well, in two senses. We have we see the tides that we have from the oceans, for example. Those are caused by the moon, so they really help regulate a lot of the things on Earth. But the moon is sort of like a bodyguard in a sense as well for the Earth. It's so close to the Earth. It's a pretty big body, and sometimes, not all the times, when we've got, asteroids or little things coming towards the Earth, if they're in the direction that the moon is in, they might get sucked in by the moon's gravity. So it helps protect us a little bit. Whereas if we didn't have the moon, everything would just head directly for the Earth. Also, we wouldn't have anything cool to look at nighttime. So that would suck.
The sky would be a lot darker most of the time, wouldn't it? Without that moon, because it's so bright during full moon.
Absolutely. Yeah, we would have the skies would be darker. It would be sort of like when there's a new moon, when we don't see a moon in the sky, which, it's kind of good. It's kind of bad. If you're trying to do a lot of observation at nighttime, you want to avoid, a night with a full moon.
Right.
But, I just think about, I don't know, 400, whatever, many years ago when we didn't have electricity and we didn't have all this light that we have at nighttime. We really relied on the light from the moon, the light that it's reflecting. Yeah.
Have you seen the trailers for the new, what is it, some kind of moonfall movie where the moon is coming crashing to Earth? It's
my gosh.
Have you seen this? No, you haven't seen this? Oh,
no.
Yeah, it's, I forget what it is. I saw the trailer and I was like, oh man, they're always thinking of something to throw at the Earth, but now it's the moon.
So it's called Moonfall?
Yeah, it's coming out in 2022. It's called Moonfall. Yeah. A NASA executive, an astronaut, and a conspiracy theorist travel to outer space to stop the moon from crashing into the Earth.
Cool.
It's got Halle Berry in it. So there you go. Moonfall.
Oh.
It's going to be a blockbuster.
Cool. Okay. Got to watch the trailers after.
Okay. Okay. I love all space movies, even if they're goofy. So they might do a really good job.
Yeah.
But it would be just on the science front. If the moon did crash into the Earth, that would be pretty much the end of the Earth, right? Because the moon is so big.
Yeah.
We'd be toast. It's just.
Yeah.
Okay. All
it's a pretty big rock to crash into the Earth.
It's a pretty big rock to crash into the Earth. Okay. I'm sorry to take up some of our valuable, serious science topics. But,
no, this is fun.
So we have 2 standard questions we ask on the Science Podcast. One of them is for our guests to share a pet story from their life, because we mix science and pets on the podcast. Sarah, do you have a pet story you could share with us?
Figuring Out Family isn't your ordinary podcast. It's a completely new experience that helps you make your family the best it can be by giving you the deep insights to help your family thrive. You'll learn how to help your family have more productive conversations and manage life's disappointments too. You'll feel inspired by the special guests that are experts in their field of family relationships. Get valuable tips for dealing with difficult family members, repair broken relationships, improving your parenting skills, and keeping your children happy and healthy. Check it out now.
Yes. Well, I don't know if it's a story or a fun fact, but I have a 7-year-old dog. I adopted my dog when he was 2, and it was during the time when I was mapping a whole bunch of craters on the moon for my PhD.
Okay.
And I decided that he deserved to have a name after a crater on the moon. So my dog's name is Tycho. Aww. And I always tell people, whenever you look at the moon, especially if it's a full moon, the brightest crater that you see, it's towards the bottom. It has a whole bunch of shiny rays around it. That's Tycho. So now everybody's got to think about my dog every time they look at the moon.
That's adorable. And we always see the same face of the moon, right? Because it's locked with us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that other side of the moon is mysterious. Ooh.
Yeah, that's why we've got these spacecrafts orbiting them.
That's right. That's right. That's adorable, Tycho. So if you get a second dog, is there a second crater that you would name the second dog after?
I've been thinking about that a lot. It was a close between Tycho and Copernicus the first time.
Copernicus
but then I'm like,
is good.
Yeah, but it's just such a long name, like Copernicus, sit, Copernicus, come. So I'm sure I would have to come up with a short nickname for it, but
Cooper.
We'll see. Cooper, yeah. Cooper's a good one.
Copernicus. There you go.
Copernicus, yeah.
People always ask us because of Bunsen and Beaker, right? They're like, if you get another dog, what are you going to call it? Well, hold up. 2 dogs is a lot of dog. But my wife really likes the Papillon. You know that type of dog? The little tiny, like, floaty ear doggies? The Papillons? Yeah. So if we got a Papillon, we would have to name it Pipette because the dog would be so little.
Oh, my God. Okay,
Pipette.
When is that happening?
Now people are going to be like, there's going to be direct messages on Twitter because of this conversation. So
I'm fully in support of Pipette.
Pipette, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for sharing your story about Tycho. You know, Tycho, that name, I don't know much about the moon. But I do watch this show on Amazon called The Expanse, and I know there's a space station called Tycho. So that's probably in reference to the crater on the moon, and named after an astronomer, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a mathematician, Tycho
Yeah.
Brahe.
Yeah, cool. The other question that's standard to the podcast is the super fact. And the super fact is something that when you share us, it kind of blows our mind away. And every time I talk to a scientist, my mind is already blown just by the first interview. But did you save a super fact for us?
I did. Well, I have two.
Yay!
Yes. So the first super fact is that there are over 1 million craters on the moon.
What? 1 million?
Over 1 million craters on the moon.
Oh my goodness.
And they're all there. It's not like the Earth where they've been erased. So there's over 1 million craters on the moon, which I'm always like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And my second, well, I don't know if it's a super fact. It's just something that gives me goosebumps every time I think about it. And it's that every time we look at a galaxy or a star, anytime I look through a telescope at an object, we're sort of looking into the past. Because the light that has left these stars and these galaxies, it takes a ton of time to get to us. So anytime we look at something, we're really looking into the past. So I always feel like I'm in the present and the past at the same time.
You're Schrodinger Sarah.
Yeah. Kind of, yeah, I guess you could say that.
You're both in the past and in the future at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So, like, if we somehow were able to put a mirror, like 65 million light years in space, and then look at the light, we'd see the dinosaurs, basically, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Like, if we could just teleport a mirror 65. So, if other alien or people are looking at Earth, they may not see anything from us. They might not see any life, like if they're really far away.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's pretty cool if they have stuff that could see that.
Yeah. They're
yeah.
aliens, so we're going to assume they're super smart. So
True. Yeah, I got you. Yep.
They'd be like, "Dang, all they got is big lizards." Well, we'll talk to them a little later.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that is a super fact. I love it. Are those craters on the moon? Are they all like big, like you could step in them, or are they when you're talking about millions of craters, some of them like the size of a thimble?
Really anything that's bigger than maybe 1 meter in diameter.
Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
That just blows my mind, because like a meter is I was just thinking like the little tiny, like tick, like a little, like a poke in the sand or something like that. But
those would be too small. Yeah, to see from here. Yeah.
These are like big divots.
They are. Yeah.
Well, that is a super fact.
Good. I'm glad.
Yay. The last question of the podcast is a really fun one. We get to know our guests a little bit more outside their area of study. And Doc, you wanted to talk a little bit about maybe it's a couple things, but it relates to Tycho, your pup. Go ahead.
It does, yeah. So one of the things that I've become really passionate about, or I think about often, is dogs and pets in general, especially now during the pandemic, where we've seen what I call a lot of pandemic puppies. Mm-hmm. Or at least that's what I see in my neighborhood.
That's Beaker. Beaker was a pandemic puppy.
Oh, so cute. Yeah. So Tycho was my first dog. I was one of those people that always wanted a dog, never did. And I decided that I was going to go through a rescue organization instead. Mm-hmm. So my dog comes from the streets of Mexico. Oh. And I adopted him when he was 2 through an organization called Coveted Canines. Which are pretty cool. They bring dogs from all around the world that need a home. I know there are a lot of other organizations that do the same. So I would encourage folks, if they can, if their situation is in a way that allows them to bring in rescue dogs, to really think about it. I originally was just going to foster Tycho for a couple of weeks, but he kept following me around and just looking at me with those puppy eyes. And I'm like, nope, no way, you're not going anywhere. So yeah, that's how Tycho came into my life.
I'm snooping through your Twitter profile. What type of dog is Tycho?
So we're not sure. We
Not
still
sure?
want to
Okay.
do one of those tests, but we
Yeah.
think he's got some sort of terrier dachshund in him, but we don't know.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. We call him, I guess they call them like village dogs. But
Yes, village
yeah.
dogs. Yeah.
Yeah.
When I talk to a dog scientist / specialist, that's one of the things they mentioned is that most dogs on Earth are quote unquote village dogs. If you look at all the dogs on Earth, the vast percentage of dogs on Earth are not pets; they're village dogs, which is kind of. Hey, that's my own super fact.
I was just gonna say.
Wait, I'm not the guest. What am I doing?
You've got all the dog super facts.
A bit, I guess. And you also wanted to talk about storytelling with the podcast. I'd love to hear this.
Yeah. So as I was saying a little bit before, how one of the things that I like to talk about or I'm passionate about is representation in STEM. A podcast that I'm involved with that I really love is called The Story Collider. And it's really about, true personal stories about science. The storytellers are scientists and non-scientists because, really everybody deals with science in one way or another in their day-to-day life. So the whole mission is to sort of highlight the diversity and variety of folks that interact with science, but really just wonderful stories. It's not like you're learning about science. It's more like you're listening to people's life stories and their interactions with science. It's a non-for-profit organization and podcast, and I really love their mission and a lot of the stories. I will say from experience, I will suggest that you do not listen to the podcast when you're at a grocery store. I have occasionally just stopped in an aisle to sob or to laugh out loud. In either case, it does not look very good. So yeah, maybe just listen to it on your walk, your commute, at home.
Hey, but you know what? Because we're in a pandemic, it will keep people away from you, right? They're not going to be up in your personal space. So there's an advantage there.
You might end up with a lot of ice cream that you didn't plan for, though.
So one follow-up question. And I apologize if I missed it. Are you is your story on the Story Collider, like you personally, or do you just like promoting this podcast?
So I do have a story. I was a story teller at some point, so my story is on there.
Oh,
but,
cool.
I'm also one of the Toronto Story Collider producers and hosts. So we're always looking for stories of people about science. So I'm one of the producers and hosts for the Toronto chapter.
We're at the end of the podcast, Doc. Where can people find you on social media? Do you have a webpage? Are you on social media?
Yeah, I have a website and I'm on social media as well. On social media, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, you can find me under SciComm Sara. So SciCommSara. And I also have a website. It's SaraMazrouei.com. So SaraMazrouei.com, where you can find out what I'm up to, where some of my upcoming speaking gigs are. And you can also get in touch for any collaboration or requests.
Perfect. I love your website, by the way. It is super well put together. So kudos. I don't know if that was you, but good job.
It is on my list of holiday break to-dos to update it. So hopefully it will look different or it will look updated in a few weeks, I hope.
Sweet. It's been my pleasure to talk to you today, Sara. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge about your space science and your passion for promoting voices that don't necessarily get to the forefront, and also letting us know about a super cool podcast and your adorable dog, Tycho.
Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Okay, it's time for story time with me, Adam. If you don't know what story time is when we talk about stories within the past 1 or 2 weeks. I will start. So I have had my first final today. It went pretty. I want to stay pretty neutral about it because you can think that you do really good on a final exam, and then you do really bad, and then it's just like not the greatest. So staying neutral, but I think I felt pretty confident about all my answers, so I think I'm going to be doing good. But studying for the final exams and then doing the final exams has been pretty stressful because social isn't my strong point and biology is a lot of memorization, so a lot of studying. Chemistry, I'm going to be fine. But the dogs and Ginger have been so great because you can just hug them, and the dogs have been making me less stressed because they'll just be there and then you can pet them. And then when I'm done studying, I can grab Beaker and have a little hug and cuddle with Beaker. And then Bunsen's just always a big cuddly bear, so that's pretty great. And then my cat has started to come into my room and meow at me because she's hungry. But sometimes I think that it is more than that she's hungry. But yeah, the dogs have been great for making me less stressed, and my cat is fantastic. So yeah, that's my story. Mom, do you have a story?
I sure do. My story has to do with the dogs. There's one of the dogs talking. Anyway, so this week Jason took the dogs to the school, but he didn't take both dogs at the same time. He took one dog at a time. And the first day he said, which dog should I take? And I said, you should take none of the dogs. What am I going to do without my puppies here at home? And Jason said, I'm going to take Bunsen. And I said, okay, you can have Bunsen. And then away Bunsen went. And then it was just Beaker and I with Ginger and, the turtles. And what was interesting is the mail carrier came and Beaker barked. And she alerted me to the interesting thing that was happening outside, which was the mail carrier coming. And normally she wouldn't do that. Normally Bunsen is the alerter, but she stepped up to be that role. So that was really interesting. And then the next day, Jason took Beaker and he left Bunsen at home. And Bunsen was his typical self. But Jason said that when he brought home Bunsen, Beaker missed him. And I don't know about the greeting when Jason brought Beaker home. But it was interesting. I got to spend alone time with each of the dogs independently. But it was just a typical day. But the dogs both had great days when they went to the school. And that's my story.
Dad, do you have a story?
Yeah, I'll touch on bringing the dogs to school. So it's a bit of a gray area during exam break. And it's been a while since we've had exam break, 2 years, actually. Of not having kids have exam breaks because exams have been canceled because of COVID. We shut down for an entire semester, and then the next year there were no finals. And so this is the first really kind of normal year for the students. And you're not really supposed to have dogs at the school because kids are at school, and some kids are afraid of dogs. Some kids are allergic to dogs. But during exam break, kids don't necessarily have to be at the school unless they come for tutorial or for studying. And that's when I bring Bunsen and Beaker in. And oh my goodness, I brought Bunsen on Monday and Beaker on Tuesday. And the dogs couldn't have been happier spending the day with the kids. And the students couldn't have been happier seeing Bunsen and Beaker. Bunsen is his normal, calm and happy self. He kind of picks up on which kids are a little scared of him, and he works and works and works to be their friend. One student was terrified of Bunsen, didn't even want to come in the room, wanted to see Bunsen because he likes my stories. But when push came to shove, he's like, no, thank you. But Bunsen just sat there and smiled at him until eventually he became friends with this student, which was really cute. And of course, Beaker's a lot smaller and less intimidating, and she was wiggly smiley to everybody. And made everybody's hearts melt. So I think it was really good for the students. It lowers the temperature in the classroom, having a dog in there. It brings the whole idea of studying down a couple notches and takes the anxiety away a bit. So it was really good to have Bunsen and Beaker there. And yes, the dogs missed each other when they came home. Beaker really missed Bunsen. When Bunsen came home on Monday, Beaker was so happy to see the big guy. Bunsen was kind of like, oh, it's Beaker. When Beaker came home on Tuesday. So
it's Beaker.
That was kind of cute. So that's my story.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing.
Okay, I think that's it for story time. Thank you guys so much for listening to story time. I hope to see you guys on the next episode of the podcast. Bye-bye.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We're at the end of another Science Podcast episode. Thanks for coming back week after week to listen to our show. Special thanks to Dr. Sara Mazrouei, who talked to us about the moon, planets, and adorable dog stories. We'd also like to give a special shout out to the Pawpack who support us on Patreon. Without their support, well, we wouldn't be able to have grown to what we've grown to. So, take it away, Chris.
Anne Schlarm, Sharon Dotson, Peggy McKeel, Chris Kelly, Samantha Dodd, Debbie Anderson, Courtney Proven, Renee Hardy, Mary Ryder, Shelby Leggett, Mary Coos, Marianne McNally, Karen Beth St. George, Bianca Hyde, Julie Smith, Andrew Lynn, Elizabeth Parmenter, Sandy Breimer, Tracy Halberg, Jenny Giger, Leela Perriello, Lisa Swartz, Catherine Jordan, Donna Craig, Jody Ogren, Liz Button, Kathy Zerker, and Ben Rathert.
For science, empathy, and cuteness.